Our scene is set in a recently renovated apartment complex, part of the new St. Augustine Square, or as what some of the locals are calling it. It hasn't actually been given that name yet, but the church that had recently been named St. Augustine, thanks to its priest's recent elevation, have begun to expand a little bit, and this apartment complex is part of the infrastructure that has been added to this particular place in Reno. In particular, it takes place at a mailbox that is standing in a sort of hollow corridor with an opening to the sky, as the night time is unusually cold for Reno, as pale ghostly clouds float through the air. One Cameron Forsythe stands before this mailbox, surrounded all around him by apartment complexes and hallways. As he opens it, he sees that there are actually two keys inside. One with a large C written on it, and the other one with a large A written on it. And this is where our scene begins.
Cameron is standing in the pale light cast by a mixture of both the moon and the hallowed electric light in the corridor before him. He holds in one hand the pair of keys that he was expecting in the numbered mailbox that he was told by the prince's ghoul to attend. But it is the other one in his other hand that has taken his attention. It is an identical pair of keys, and he is looking at this, wondering why there are two sets of keys when he was expecting only one. He is running various solutions through his mind as to why this could be, and he is thinking of various things, whether or not he is perhaps in some way angered the prince and is walking into an ambush or some kind of trap, whether it is a mistake by the prince to have accidentally put two there, and whether he is supposed to return the second one or keep it for himself. Myriad solutions are washing around in his brain, and he almost doesn't notice the other person as they arrive.
Approaching from behind Cameron, and he will certainly hear footsteps, is his prefect, Lady Blackmoon. She is dressed in black pants and comfortable shoes as she normally is, and she's wearing a leather jacket that was passed to her from her grandchild, an East Coast special, as it were. She's wearing the coat because it is unseasonably cold this evening. As she approaches the mailbox that she was directed to go to, she stops when she sees Cameron is standing in front of it, holding a key, looking at her quizzically. She stops for a moment and tilts her head to the side, and she says, "Hello, Cameron."
He looks at you with a look of a mixture of surprise, both unexpected yet a pleasant arrival. He tosses one of the sets of keys to Alix and says, "Good evening, Alix. It seems that both of these are identical keys. Perhaps we're supposed to meet here after all."
Alix nods and catches the key as he tosses it to her. However, she looks very, very disturbed. Something is obviously weighing on her mind, and she approaches and she kind of looks around to make sure that they are not being watched or followed. And she says, "Why are you here?"
He makes sure that the door is closed behind them, and he begins walking along the corridor slowly. He calls over his shoulder as he walks off and says, "Believe it or not, I was summoned." What that has to mean is yet to be revealed, but it doesn't come to keep the prince waiting.
As he mentions that he's there to meet with the prince, she visibly tenses. And very uncharacteristic of her, she kind of snakes her hand into the crook of his elbow and holds it with some firmness. And she says, I don't know if you're aware of what's going on, Cameron. And she looks at him and she says, if the opportunity arises, choose to save yourself.
He looks down at the hand in his arm and looks up at Alix. He keeps her eyes for a moment and smiles. The one thing that you'll notice about this is, unlike his usual fake and very practiced smile that he flashes every now and then, merely for appearance's sake, this actually appears to be a genuine smile of affection, and he says, "Don't worry, Alix. I think, logically speaking, there's no reason why I would be here for any bad reason. I've stood there for some time with a key in my hand thinking why he would have called me here. I have done nothing wrong as far as I can think of, and if he decides to turn his ire on me, I will most definitely make my way to the nearest escape."
She nods and says, unfortunately, logic is not the rule of the day, and it's not you I'm worried about. And she smiles as they head towards down the corridor towards their destination.
You can hear the jangling sound as Cameron twirls the keys in his hand as he walks down the room. The keys, he seems to be just flicking them around in his hands, trying to take his mind off the meeting that's coming up, and eventually they reach the door with the correct number. He stands for a moment thinking how etiquette would demand that perhaps they enter, and he shrugs to himself and just raps on the door a couple of times.
There is no response.
Having knocked on the door and having done the only thing that he thinks would be appropriate, he opens the door and stands aside and gestures for Alix to step in.
Alix kind of snakes her head around the crack of the door as it opens. She does walk through it. After all, she is the age before beauty, as they say. She enters the door and holds it, kind of pushes it open for Cameron as they enter.
The apartment inside looks like it had been recently painted. Some rather inexpensive, but nonetheless not necessarily poor quality looking chairs and coffee tables can be found about. On the walls there are a couple of very kitschy, but nonetheless not offensive to the eye paintings. But none of that will stand out to you, for sound can be heard from what would be the living room of the apartment, and as you two walk in, you will see the prince's ghoul sitting in one of those inexpensive chairs. As the two of you approach, he will get up and bow, and sort of turn his head to the other individual who is in the room. On a dresser drawer sits a TV, and on it, the local news is playing. It is going over the events that transpired earlier on in the night, and all of that distinct hype and almost obsession that comes after such events of tragedy, or the world just has to ask itself why, and those whose livelihoods are dependent on the word of mouth and the viewing of their work, try to use that to their most advantage in order to get as many viewers as possible. And one such viewer sits on the far corner end in another one of those chairs, roughly about maybe 10 feet away from his ghoul. The prince does not get up. He just simply sits cross-legged in his priestly attire, just watching the TV. A look is on his face, one that the two of you will recognize immediately, one of him trying to contain a storm of emotions that is going through his mind right now. A very pensive, very emotionless look, but one of thin ice, where just the slightest crack will have it all come flowing forward. Good evening. I trust you're able to find this place easily enough.
Sorry, I was muted. Lady Blackmoon would come in and she would notice the people who are in the room, and she will bow and she will say, Prince Alvarez.
The prince will sort of look to his ghoul, and his ghoul will nod his head, in which case he will very politely scoot past both Miss Blackmoon and Miss Forsythe and stand by the door, not impeding the both of you, but just standing watch, occasionally just slightly opening it and looking outside, but never at instances when the volume in the room gets loud enough that somebody would be able to hear. The prince does finally stand as he takes a few steps towards you and says, "What do you think of the place? We're still trying to move furniture around, but I think it should be sufficient. I thought it would draw too much attention to tint the windows, so we're in the process of currently installing curtains."
Lady Blackmoon will nod and she will, give a cursory look around. And is there wallpaper or is it wood?
It would be wood that's been painted over.
Okay. She kind of lightly touches the wood, and she says, I think it's quaint, but I hope you set aside time to bless the place. All new homes should be blessed, as I'm sure you know.
I was thinking about doing it last, as sort of a cutting of the ribbon, as it were, for, us religious types. I'm glad you like the place, although there's one small part that I'm not quite sure of what to make of my mind up, and that's this, as he points to the TV. This I haven't yet made my mind up about. What do you think?
What's playing on the TV?
Sorry, it's essentially like the Fox News equivalent of the, breaking news, shooting happened, police internal care at hospital. How could this madness happen?
Lady Blackmoon, the irony is not lost on her, and the point that the prince is trying to make is immediately taken. She looks at the newscast and she gives a sideways glance to Cameron, as if hearkening back to a conversation they just had, and she says, "My prince, I don't know what to say. I was with the seneschal when the news came."
It's funny because no sooner had it started airing, I got this interesting text message from our harpy. You know our harpy, Mr. Innocenti, of course. Of course you do. He definitely does like to go around. He said, and I quote, "Bless you, computer. Sorry. Definite kindred involvement." Now, what am I supposed to think when I get a text message like that when something like that is playing? And again, I still haven't made up my mind. I think it might be just a little bit against the kind of theme I'm going for here.
Cameron seems to shake his head. He looks and listens for a moment at a bit more of the doom and gloom story coming through on the TV and looks to the prince. He has a look on his face of pensive thought, and he says, although I can only promise one thing, that I have had no involvement in anything recently myself since your decree, I am a man who doesn't make decisions on less than all the facts. That's just who I am, my prince. With only a text message to work on, I cannot give you a full appraisal as to the situation, in my opinion.
And that is good. That's one of the reasons why I called you here. I gave that message not even a full 24 hours before that happened. Now, under a normal circumstance, I would say that this could simply just be a matter of misinformation, and when I said that the masquerade should be upheld at all costs, that it might have been skewed along the way. But I'm sure you two are aware of the modifications our dear former prince made to ShriekNet.
Lady Blackmoon just nods. She's not saying anything at this point. She is agitated, but she's managing to hold it together. I rolled courage and self-control. She is unhappy, but just remaining pensive for now, just listening to what the prince has to say. She's not going to interrupt him.
That was installed so that mass communication on a scale that had not been seen in the city, within Camarilla territory, could be made so that breaking information can be shared between kindred in safety and in expeditious speed. So, what am I to make of this? Did they not get the message? Did they forget to check their email? Is this just an unfortunate event? Am I being grossly misinformed by my harpy, and this is the work of some mad gunman? This isn't the first time we've had any shootings in Reno. We are in Nevada, after all.
Cameron still has the pensive, thoughtful look on his face as he seems to be trying to work his way through the variables that he's being bombarded with by the prince. He almost seems to zone out for a moment as he rubs his chin and looks down at the floor, and he glances briefly towards the TV. If I'm to understand, and please correct me if I'm wrong, this is breaking news happening within, from what I can hear, within the last 12 to 24 hours. Am I correct, my prince?
That is correct, Mr. Forsythe.
Then, and we have no idea as to who is involved. No one's come forward and said what happened, given a account as to the story that we are hearing.
That's correct, Mr. Forsythe, with one exception. That is our dear harpy, Mr. Innocenti. So, why or how are you and I going to take that he believes there is definite, not possible, definite kindred involvement?
Well, the only conclusion I can draw is that someone has spoken to Mr. Innocenti and spilled the beans, to use an old expression, as to what happened last night. He is either being forthright and truthful and has dutifully passed that on to yourself, Or there is more information that has not been passed forward. I would have thought, if that were my situation, that a full disclosure of what had happened should be made immediately in order to allow for a suitable response to be made. Either way, the only way we're going to get through this is to speak to Mr. Innocenti as soon as possible and get to the bottom of this.
That is correct. But there's something else that is just perking my curiosity just a tiny bit. Whoever gave this information to Mr. Innocenti gave it to the Harpy before anyone else, to my knowledge, because if they had given it to any of you, I know you would have told me, and that's because you two are so far the only reliable kindred in this entire city that I can talk to rationally.
I
Go ahead. Sorry.
I suspect perhaps, I'm sure in your years you have heard the expression that blood is thicker than water. We all know what clan allegiance that Mr. Innocenti has. Perhaps someone of his clan has approached him as a fellow clan member in a panicked state and reviewed what has happened to him, and perhaps has not thought as rationally as other more seasoned kindred such as ourselves would have done.
He may be frozen.
Quick, use up him while we can.
Sorry about that. I cut out for just a tiny bit.
That's okay.
But no, I got the messages of it, and that was good. So the prince will then turn around, head back over to the comfortable, albeit cheap, chair, and sit down it again, and look at the two other kindred and will say, and now we're getting somewhere. I want to find out who gave this information to Mr. Innocenti. I need to find out what happened and how extensive the damage is. I would like to think, even with our past history with princes, that we could have at least a tiny bit of collaboration and all differences being put aside in the threat of hunters within our city, but apparently old habits die hard. Am I wrong in thinking that?
Lady Blackmoon will kind of glance up at the TV again and look at the floor for a moment, and she will say, "Chaos reigns, and this is not acceptable. This reeks of chaos."
Yes, it does, Miss Blackmoon. That is the other reason why I have called the two of you here. I'm going to be making an announcement later on tonight, one that will change the city. One that I hope will only be temporary, but is something that I am now forced to do. This city needs order now more than ever. It needs a chain of command, and we are not getting that when so many of our prefects are either incapacitated, missing, or off on family business. So, henceforth immediately, until a time in the future when I see fit and all threats to Reno have been expunged, I am disbanding all of the coteries. You are all now part of the theocracy. One coterie. One single force. Because you two have proven yourself invaluable these past few nights, I am going to ensure that you remain the same level of influence you did prior to this edict. And of course, I still owe you the title of Keeper of Elysium, Cameron.
Lady Blackmoon is just simply kind of staring at the prince a little bit in shock.
Cameron
This, as he points to the TV, is unacceptable. Me not knowing what has happened is unacceptable.
She nods, and she says, I agree wholeheartedly, and if this is your will, it shall be done. What would you ask of me in the night or so to come?
You have helped defend the city for even longer than I've been here, and I need you to continue doing so. And it is because of that I'm going to make you my Templar. The sheriff is going to report to you now. You are going to direct them, and you are going to give that information to me. Since you have done a better job with it than some of our more recent additions.
She nods, and then she says, as you wish, it will be done.
Mr. Forsythe, in addition to being Keeper of Elysium, I'm also making you my High Curate. You have had a logical mind and a knack for how the mortal world works enough that you will be able to handle the infrastructure of keeping the city running smoothly and the masquerade in check. The only one who will be above you will be the Seneschal, myself, and now Miss Blackmoon. Any matters involving domain, as well as the acquirement of new domain and influence, shall need to first get passed through you, who you will then pass on to me.
understood.
Lady Blackmoon interrupts for a moment, and she says, if I may, what will we be doing with Mr. Innocente?
That is a wonderful point. So far, despite everything, he has been a decent harpy. He did give this information to me as soon as it happened, and that is to be commendable, but he did not tell me who it was that gave him the information. So he will remain harpy. Pretty as a painting.
She nods and she says, well, previously he was standing in for Mr. Kent, but I assume that is a moot point now.
There are no more whips. There are no more prefects. There's a sheriff, a harpy, and now there is a Templar and a High Curate. And there is the Prince and Seneschal.
My
If
prince.
I may make a suggestion, she says,
You may.
I would meet with Mr. Innocente before you issue this proclamation, so we know who may be more upset by this information than others.
Very wise indeed, Miss Blackmoon. I will send a message to our harpy, and we will know who, if any, will dare cause waves after that.
She
I
nods.
actually can't remember which way I pointed, so...
My prince,
Turn around, so yeah. Yes.
thank you for your entrusting of my skills. I appreciate that and will endeavour certainly to serve as best I can. However, I want to make sure that in the spirit of openness that we all three share, that you'll know what I plan to do now that you have trusted me with this task.
Proceed.
It is my understanding, and again, please correct me if I am incorrect in this, that as Keeper of Elysium, it would be part of my main duties to maintain security of Elysiums and those within.
Correct.
I understand that it is a keeper's responsibility to also ensure that the traditions are maintained.
That is also correct.
My plan, and feel free to, if you think it appropriate, to incorporate this into your overall edict later. My plan was to reenact again what you have already said about the lockdown on the city. Clearly that message has not sunk home. People are, as we know, already in domains of their own. I think currently we need to ensure that people know that there is only one Elysium. There is only one place that people can use as such a thing. I offer my casino as such a place, if you are willing. I believe it has sufficient security. I can bolster more if necessary, given the hunter threat. And that way we know that a place that has not been discovered by the hunters is safe and can be relied upon as a haven by its truest definition. The problem we have currently is we have kindred still living in areas designated, temporarily at least, as Elysiums, when these places have been flagged. That cannot continue, I do not think.
That is correct.
I think that domain, we need to at some point have a discussion about how domain is going to be used as well. Again, it is your decision on how it should be apportioned. For example, we have Mr. Graves, who currently, I would argue, is not worthy of domain currently. But this
Lady Blackmoon will interrupt Cameron, and she will say, I understand your point, my friend. I don't know if this is the time.
He looks and smiles. Of course, forgive me, my prince, for running away with myself. Once I tend to start thinking down the track, it sometimes takes a lot to stop me. But there is one thing that is important that you should know. You gave the initial command that Mr. Graves should not be staked when taken into custody. He did, however, on the way out of the building, try and elude custody, and therefore I had no option other than to take him back to my own haven and stake him for his own custody and his own
Does the prince need to make a roll?
You know what? I think he does. Fortunately, I don't have my other laptop with the character
I can
sheet,
roll
so
it.
It would be temporary willpower.
Yeah.
Plus self-control, which he has a pretty decent amount of. So I think that would be... We'll go for that. 7?
Oh.
Eesh.
Well...
Oh, dear.
Well, he gets 2.
Would you
Oh,
see
I
the other
rolled
one?
for you. I'm sorry. I thought you couldn't roll.
Oh, no, this is the good one. Well, I didn't get any successes, but I didn't botch.
Okay.
So, well, this is going to be interesting. At that, you will see the prince's eyes suddenly just go pitch black for a moment, as though the pupils had enlarged enough to eclipse everything else, at which point, with his unnatural strength, he will pick up the remote that he was using and throw it at the TV, utterly destroying both in the process, before sitting down and returning and going, "Is that so?"
I apologize that I had to resort to breaking your edict. I thought it best in the interest of security of Mr. Graves that he be staked to avoid him from breaking his promise of acting like a gentleman and a decent man. He has proven this to be false, and he currently resides in one of my freezers awaiting your sentence.
Very well done. He has betrayed my trust 2 times now. Let us say that his fate is not looking desirable at the moment.
Well, when you require his...
So again, you prove yourself more than capable, Cameron.
Thank you, my prince, but I would advise if you require his attendance, you notify me a day in advance. He will require some time to thaw. And
As the prince begins to calm down a bit.
he almost smiles a little at his attempt to inject some humour into the conversation.
We now have the start of bringing order back to this city. If this still does not ensure that our city remains safe, and that the Camarilla remains strong, and that above all, the masquerade remains intact, the only option left is to develop the tactics of my predecessor, the former prince. And I think we can all agree that that is not a desirable outcome.
Lady Blackmoon will nod grimly, as she knows exactly what he's talking about. And she will say, let's speak with Mario and what other kindred is involved in this and resolve this before the worst happens.
Make sure it is done. Inform me of any changes, as he will reach into his pocket, pull forth a piece of paper, and he will then get up and hand it to Miss Blackmoon. On it is the number for his actual cell phone. He will say, "Make sure I am made aware of any changes. I will do the same for the both of you."
She will nod.
As of now, we are all members of the theocracy. The city has languished by the temptation of sin for too long, and it is beginning to show in the reckless behavior of our unfortunate neonates, and even some of our more supposedly knowable ancilla. Do make sure this doesn't continue.
She will nod again.
And that is all.
Cameron will bow curtly and make to the door and open it, and again hold it open for his now superior to leave before him.
Quick question: was the prince texting Mario a summons, or am I going to be letting Mario know that his presence is required?
No, the prince will text Mario. He's going to do it himself. He's going to want Mario to hear his own words.
And with that, Lady Blackmoon and Cameron exit the apartments and begin their journey down the hallway, the long journey out into the long, dark night. We can end there.
Yep. Good night, and thank you for watching.